Welcome to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. I am Adam Rank alongside Kimmy Checks, Marcus Grant, and Kimmy, how you living this morning? It's week 15.
It's week 15. Oh my gosh. It's like literally here. The season is nearing. Fantasy playoffs are here. All of us trying to make a bid to get into the fantasy championship round. I'm good. My Kansas City Chiefs have a huge game against the Saints today, so I'm excited. 2 days in a row of NFL football since we had some Saturday games yesterday. I'm fired up. Marcus, happy Sunday. How are you?
Happy Sunday, Kimmy, and to you as well, Rank. Yeah, this is a big one for everybody. Look, understand, if you win, you are into the fantasy playoffs. If you lose, then nobody's going to remember what you did this season, and, you know, you're basically just going to be relegated to the dustbin of history. So, no pressure. No pressure.
Well, I'll remember because I'll be like, well, I started this one quarterback when I knew I should have started Kirk Cousins, and it will mean that I might not take this home. This is the official NFL Fantasy Trophy that you can check out at NFL.com/fantasy trophy. Bring this home to your league. It's pretty cool. You know what? You can add names right here. Just get nameplates, slap it on. Let the winner design this base of the trophy. You're cool. This is, you know, everybody in your league kicks in $10. You're all good to go. Now, if you have questions, because it's playoff semifinal time, you can hit us up on Twitter at NFL Fantasy. Or if you're watching the show via YouTube, you can check us out at youtube.com/NFL. Our own Michael F. Florio is in the comment section. Never go to the comment section. But you know what? That's what Florio does. He's there answering all your questions, and you can be like, why'd you tell me to start Austin Eckler? No, I'm kidding. Who wouldn't have started him? You'd be a lunatic not to. Anyways, big news coming down this week. Over the weekend, the Saints placed all-pro wide receiver Michael Thomas on injured reserve. Thomas had been dealing with an ankle injury since the start of the season, missed 7 games already due to the injury. If you have Thomas on your team, stick around because later we'll have some sleeper wideouts you can pick up and play and get you sorted. I know this is, you know, not what you wanted this time of year. And speaking of which, speaking of his teammate, I should say, some good news for the Saints. Drew Brees is back and starting today versus the Chiefs. So, Kimmy, let me ask you, do you trust putting Drew Brees in the lineup today?
No, I do not. Happy he's back. So excited. You know, we understand that this is going to be a really fun shootout between the Saints and the Chiefs. However, I don't know how healthy Drew Brees actually is. I don't think that Sean Payton would rush him back on the field if he wasn't. But at the same time, Drew Brees wasn't really playing good fantasy football this entire season. I understand that a lot of fantasy managers may be kind of teetering with the idea because they probably picked up Taysom Hill. Happy Drew Brees is back. If anything, this means increased production for Alvin Kamara. So all of those fantasy managers should be happy. And hopefully Emmanuel Sanders and Traquan Smith can get some good action from him. But I do not trust starting him. If I did start him, maybe I'd start him over Tua. He has a really tough matchup against the Patriots. Maybe Jalen Hurts as well. But I just think this means better things for his receivers as opposed to Drew Brees himself.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would stay away from Brees if I could. I think he is, you know, just outside the top 10 or top 12 in terms of where I think he's going to finish this week. But like Kimmy said, this is good news for Kamara. It's good news for Jared Cook. I know a lot of people have questions about him this week. So I would be okay with starting any of the peripheral pieces around Drew Brees, but I do think you can find some better quarterback options this week.
Yeah, I think Jared Cook, he's going up against the Chiefs, who've allowed the second most fantasy points to tight ends over the last month or so. So that's a pretty good matchup. Look for him to be involved heavily today. But let's take a look at the notable actives and inactives for this week. And there's a lot of them. And obviously we start at the quarterback position. Alex Smith is out, but Matthew Stafford is in. Listen, I don't think I've talked more Matthew Stafford and Chase Daniel than I did this week on NFL Fantasy Live. I'm glad it's paying off now. Matt Stafford active. Ezekiel Elliott, inactive. That kind of came down the pike. We'll talk about his replacement, Tony Pollard, in a little bit here. Antonio Gibson is inactive. Damian Harris, inactive. David Johnson is active, but Ronald Jones and Myles Gaskin are not active today, so there's a lot of uncertainty at the running back position. Wide receiver-wise, good news, Brandon Cooks, Marquise Hollywood Brown, both active this week, but Kenny Golladay, who's missed a lot of time, Julio Jones, Devontae Parker, Debo is out. Mike Gesicki, who would have been a great start this week in that game against the New England Patriots, he's not going to be active either. So, of course, that means guys like Lynn Bowden, Savon Ahmed, probably for the Miami Dolphins, even though that is a tough matchup. But I want to go back to the Ezekiel Elliott news, because this one, for a lot of you, it's probably, you don't have to make that decision. But now you do have to make a decision on Tony Pollard. So, Marcus, how are you feeling about that with them going up against the 49ers today?
I know a lot of people, and I've seen it across fantasy Twitter in the last few minutes, especially before we started, that people are automatically just popping Tony Pollard into their top 15, top 12 even, I've seen in some places. I don't have that level of optimism. I mean, we've watched Ezekiel Elliott over the last month be the RB20 across fantasy, and now you're taking a player who I don't think is quite as talented. Look, there's a reason Tony Pollard was the backup, and it's not just contract size. So you're taking a guy who isn't quite as dynamic. You're putting him behind a bad offensive line in a matchup against a team that is not giving up a ton of points to fantasy running backs. I just don't have a great level of confidence about Tony Pollard. And generally speaking, I think there are other guys you can go. I'm getting a lot of questions about him. And generally speaking, I have tended to go the other way. I've had people ask me about Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson. I think I'd start both of those guys over Tony Pollard this week.
What about Leonard Fournette, Kimmy? Obviously, with Ronald Jones not being available today, how much trust do you put in him?
He was a healthy scratch last week, right? But we're excited to see him back on the football field, knowing that Ronald Jones is no longer there. So he should be truly the lead back in this offense. I understand that a lot of people may not have other options, but you should be weary. Now, head coach Bruce Arians mentioned and said that Keyshawn Vaughn is quote unquote come on like gangbusters and is going to have more involvement in this game. And they also still have LaShawn McCoy, who gets a lot of work for passing down, something that Leonard Fournette has not done so well, and he played his way out of because of drops and missed blocks. So I understand if you have excitement about starting Leonard Fournette and you want to go for it because you see the matchup against the Falcons. Even though the Falcons defense has been bad this entire season, they're bad against wide receivers and they're bad against quarterbacks. They're not so horrible against the run game. They're actually pretty tough. I think they're top 10 against opposing running backs. So one, the matchup's going to be a little bit tougher than you would expect. And two, I don't know if Leonard Fournette is going to have the production to really secure you a ton of fantasy points in the playoffs. If you have no other options, that's fine, but just temper your expectation.
Yeah, and you're talking about running out of options, and Marcus alluded to this as well. Both Raheem Mostert is active today, so that is good, but he's been battling an injury. Jeff Wilson, I think both of these guys are viable flex options. The Cowboys have given up the fourth most fantasy points to running backs over the last month. I like both of them. And it should be noted, Mark Ingram, we didn't have him on the board. He's a healthy scratch, which means it's J.K. Dobbins season. So if you've been stubbornly holding on to these rookie running backs, Jonathan Taylor, Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, they are now becoming league winners. Okay, time now for 15 for 15, presented by Geico, and that means it's Sunday Fun Day! Oh, I love it. There it is. All right, thank you, Zach. Let's talk about some of our top starts of the week at every position, and, well, not every position. We're not going to talk punters. Sorry, guys. I know it's part of football, but in any event, here are the quarterbacks. Tom Brady, Phillip Rivers, Jalen Hurts, Ryan Tannehill, Ben Roethlisberger on Monday night, Kirk Cousins. This Kirk Cousins one is driving me crazy. And I am very afraid of Russell Wilson, but you all are too literal. And I cannot put him on a sit list because you guys will be like, well, you told me to start Chase Daniel. And I never would have said any such thing. But, hey, Marcus, what about Jared Goff? He's not on this list. How do you feel about him?
I think it's a great matchup. Now, whether or not he takes advantage of it is a completely different story, but the Jets have been pretty miserable against quarterbacks. They've been miserable against pretty much everybody all year long, but especially against fantasy quarterbacks. And so the matchup is great. Now, I know, Rank, you were suggesting, and a lot of people have, that maybe the Rams run the football a lot, and maybe this could end up being a Cam Akers day. But the matchup is set out right in front of Jared Goff. The other thing that worries me, weirdly, is that he has been just average at SoFi Stadium. I don't know if he's not gotten comfortable in the new place yet or what, but he has not put up a 17-point game yet in the new stadium. So that's a little something to be worried about. But if he doesn't go out and ball, it's not because he had a tough matchup this week.
Okay, well, Jared Goff, good matchup against the Jets. Another good matchup, Tom Brady at the Falcons. I keep saying this. Anytime I bet against Tom Brady, he balls out. So I'm never doing it again. I love this matchup, him playing Atlanta. I was just talking about Leonard Fournette, his running back, getting the opportunity with Rojo out. I expect Tom Brady to be slinging the ball all day. He's had 2+ passing touchdowns in 4 straight games. The Falcons are allowing the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. Right now, TB12 is the 10th fantasy quarterback on the season. I think he's going to finish as a top 5 fantasy quarterback this week just because of that matchup. So be comfortable firing up TB12.
Wait, should I start Kirk Cousins over him?
Stop. Get out.
Okay, good.
Yes.
I'm just testing you. I'm testing you.
I want to test you too. Do not start Kirk. You're fine, right?
All right. Thank you so much. Here are the running backs, and I listed a bunch of them because you know what? I want to help you out as much as possible, and it might not help you because you might have multiple players on this list. We talked about Cam Akers, Jonathan Taylor, the rookies coming through. David Montgomery, do not think about sitting him. He has been a beast over the last number of weeks. Miles Sanders has played really well. J.K. Dobbins, J.D. McKissick, Kenyon Drake. I know our producer, Hytham, says that he's guaranteed a 3-yard touchdown plunge seemingly every week. But let's talk a little bit about Cam, Kimmy, because obviously I like him. How do you feel?
Oh, I love Cam Akers, and I think he's an absolute must-start this week. Now, you alluded to it earlier. We like Jared Goff as a start, right? Marcus loves him as a start. I do as well, but we have a feeling that this is going to be a Cam Akers game and that they're going to run the ball. Now, it is solidified that he is officially the lead back, and hopefully Coach Sean McVay does not now mess with us. Now, he's had a touchdown in 3 of the last 4 games. 13 touches inside the 10-yard line since week 11. The rest of the Rams running backs have only had 1 touch inside of the 10-yard line. Fantasy points increasing in 4 straight games, as well as his snaps increasing in the last 3 contests that the Rams have played. Cam Akers is good. He should absolutely be a must-start at the running back position this week against the Jets.
I'm going to go with Miles Sanders here, and it was nice to see him sort of come back into our fantasy lives last week, and I do think it sort of coincided with Jalen Hurts getting the start there. He had the nice long touchdown run in that game against the Saints, and now he's got a matchup against the Cardinals, who've given up the 8th most fantasy points per game to the position over the last 4 weeks. So this is an opportunity, again, with Hurts starting and with Hurts' running ability really changing what the defense has to pay attention to. I think this is going to open up some things for Sanders again in Week 15.
I'm looking at all these great choices, and I'm going into one of my most heavily emotionally invested leagues, and my running backs are Tony Pollard and Jeff Wilson Jr. So I feel really great about today. But let's take a look at the wide receiver position and some guys that you can start. Brandon Ayuk, Deontay Johnson, Calvin Ridley. It's not the best matchup, but I still trust him even with Julio Jones out. Justin Jefferson, last time he went up against Jalen Johnson, he had a pretty good game against him. He's also ailing today, but Allen Robinson's great. T.Y. Hilton has come alive over the last couple of weeks. But what about A.J. Brown? 9 touchdowns on this season. Are we feeling A.J. Brown, Marcus?
I am absolutely feeling A.J. Brown. The Lions have struggled against wide receivers all year long. 4th most points per game over the course of the season. 2nd most points per game allowed over the last 4 weeks. And A.J. Brown has just been a beast all season long. Look, I learned the hard way earlier in the year that you don't sit him, so you definitely aren't going to sit him now.
All right, another guy who should absolutely not be sitting on anybody's bench, especially in the playoffs, is Brandon Ayuk. Amazing matchup today against the Dallas Cowboys, who are allowing the most receiving touchdowns to wide receivers this season. The Cowboys have allowed 22 touchdowns to wideouts. Hopefully Brandon Ayuk can do that and get in the end zone. We've seen him really pop off these last few weeks. 17 plus fantasy points in 5 straight games. He's currently the wide receiver 3 since week 7, averaging almost 21 fantasy points. Ayukin is good. That's your guy, Marcus, and he's going to ball today against the Cowboys.
You know, it's none of my business, but the Packers could have drafted him instead of Jordan Love, but whatever. Let's look at the tight ends. T.J. Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, Logan Thomas. You know, he's been pretty good. He's been good. Rob Gronkowski, I trust today against the Atlanta Falcons. They've given up a lot of production to opposing tight ends. Jared Cook, I talked about this at the top. The Chiefs have been very generous as the Chiefs defense is to opposing tight ends. With no Michael Thomas, I expect Jared Cook to get into the end zone. And I mean like with the football, not like just walking through on his way to the locker room or something. Tyler Higbee, I don't know. I know, you got to be desperate. But the Jets give up a lot of points to tight ends. And Cole Kmet, the mighty Met, against the Minnesota Vikings. I love him today. That was 15 for 15 presented by Geico. Now look, sometimes you're in a no-win situation, but in the distance, you see somebody approaching, and you might think to yourself, oh great, it's one single X-Wing. That'll save us. Actually, sometimes it will, because that's all you need. Hey, so that's that. Anyways, Fantasy Heroes coming up. DK Metcalf scoring fantasy points for you. You know what? I don't necessarily love Russell Wilson today, but I do think that DK Metcalf is somebody you need to start. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. There he is, Tua Tagovailoa. By the way, it is so great to have a prominent left-handed quarterback back in the NFL. It's so much more aesthetically pleasing. No disrespect to you righties, but you look goofy throwing a football. Lefties, it looks natural. That's why there's so few of us. In any event, here are our starting defenses for Week 15. I do like Tua's Dolphins going up against the New England Patriots this week. Seattle's got a great matchup going up against Dwayne Haskins. The Titans, I'm less enthused by with Matthew Stafford back, but anytime you take a dome team late in the season going outdoors, even if it's in Tennessee and it's nice, I don't care. And the Rams, the last couple of weeks, have been crushing it, have been absolutely crushing it. By the way, if you have any other questions, hopefully not about defenses, hopefully you have that settled by now, you can hit us up on Twitter at NFL Fantasy, or if you're watching the show via YouTube, youtube.com/NFL. Our own Michael F. Florio is there in the comments, and I told him not to do it because you guys are mean, and I don't appreciate it because Florio's a nice kid. But in any event, he's answering your questions, and we can't let him take all the heat because, I know how this works for anybody who started, Keenan Allen the other night. Anyways, let's not talk about old stuff. We've got questions here. I saw Zeke is out, picked up Pollard, Dobbins and Swift starting. Do you start Pollard over either one of those guys? Kimmy, how about you? How do you feel?
No, and no. You heard Marcus kind of alluding to it earlier that Tony Pollard probably isn't the best start, even with Ezekiel Elliott out. There were a lot of people who already had questions about Zeke starting and his production. I think both J.K. Dobbins and DeAndre Swift are going to have production, so you're good to go.
All right. Connor, Michelle, or Russell Gage at the flex in a PPR. Marcus, which way are you leaning?
I'm probably leaning towards Sony Michelle just because with Damian Harris not available, look for Michelle to get a bigger workload, but I don't really love any of these guys this week.
I was going to say, Brian, show us who else is available. See if Tony Pollard's available, because that's where I would actually throw him in. D. Johnson or Adam Thielen? Hey, Mark, there are multiple D. Johnsons in this league. Are we talking about David Johnson? Are we talking about Duke Johnson, who didn't make the trip? Are we talking about Deontay Johnson? I'm going to assume it's that. I'm going to assume it's Deontay Johnson. I'm going to go with Adam Thielen against the Bears. I know the Bears defense has played well, but they've given up a lot of production. They shut down Deshaun Watson last week, but that was a 1 week. And it's Kirk Cousins at home. Anyways, Jeff Wilson or Marquise Hollywood Brown in the flex? Kimmy.
Ooh, I actually kind of like Marquise Hollywood Brown this week. We saw him have that huge touchdown pass from Lamar Jackson last week. He's coming back into our lives, so rock with Marquise.
All right, fair enough. And Justin wants to know CeeDee Lamb or Jalen Reagor. Marcus.
Ooh, this is a tough call here. I think I might go with... Yeah, I'm going to go CeeDee Lamb here. This is a really tough call, though. I think both of them will have about equal production, but I think Lamb probably has more touchdown upside.
Oh, but Jalen Reagor just seems so fun. But anyways, thank you so much for sending in your questions at NFL Fantasy. Michael F. Florio. Oh, my God, it's time for Fantasy Heroes. Look at that. Jumping the guy. All right. This is like getting played off at the Golden Globes or something. Like, here's the horns. Okay, moving on. Fantasy Heroes. Message received loud and clear. Marcus, player that's going to carry you on Sunday. Go.
Allen Robinson, and much like Boba Fett helped Mando along to helping to retrieve Grogu, Allen Robinson is going to ferry you into the championship round. The Vikings have been pretty awful all year long against wide receivers, giving up the 5th most fantasy points per game to the position. Allen Robinson has just look. I know it's become sort of almost a meme of how Allen Robinson has prospered despite the litany of less than stellar quarterbacks he's played with. But Mitch Trubisky's playing well right now, so things are looking up for him, especially in a really good matchup.
Speaking of good matchups, a running back who's going to crush it this week because of the matchup. It's the rookie JTT going up against the Texans, who are allowing the most rushing yards per game to running backs this season. 15-plus fantasy points in 3 straight games, 20-plus fantasy points in consecutive matchups. The matchup is there. We understand that JTT is good. Huge upside because of that red zone production. Get him into your lineup.
Love Jonathan Taylor this week, and I also like Cooper Kupp. I know that I'm a little apprehensive about Jared Goff this week. I feel that Goff's going to be somewhere right around 200 passing yards with a touchdown. I'm projecting that touchdown to go to Cooper Kupp. The Jets have allowed the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers since week 11, so I feel pretty comfortable. Again, the quarterback needs that volume. The wide receivers can get away with it a little bit more. Let's talk about some fantasy villains, though. Not like Bib Fortuna, who, dude, that guy got swole. Like, not in a good way
go
either.
A little bit. I don't know. He let himself go.
If you're sitting in that chair, apparently something happens to you. But Marcus, who is going to be a villain for you this week in fantasy football?
I think it's going to be Clyde Edwards-Helaire, unfortunately. It has not been the season I think we hoped from him, especially in the latter weeks. The Chiefs seem to be using him less. They're sprinkling in Le'Veon Bell a little bit more. And on top of it, they have that Saints defense. And I know Jalen Hurts had over 100 yards. I know Miles Sanders had over 100 yards. But that feels kind of like an anomaly. And it feels like New Orleans is going to try to tighten things up on their run defense after what happened to them in Week 14. So if you can avoid CEH, and look, I understand if you can't, but if you can, I would try to pivot to another option.
All right, let's stick with the rookie theme here, but instead toss it over to Tua, the quarterback facing the Patriots. Now, we understand what the Patriots did over against the Chargers, right? They're incredibly good against rookie starting quarterbacks. The rookie starting quarterbacks are averaging less than 10 fantasy points versus the Patriots when they play him. A huge concern here is not only the matchup, but also the fact that the Dolphins are without a ton of players, and Tua is not going to be playing with his most targeted player in Mike Gesicki. We also understand that Devontae Parker is not going to be playing. Take all of that and combine it together, and I just do not think that Tua is going to be a starting option this week, especially for the fantasy playoffs.
I'm going to go with Terry McLaurin is my fantasy villain. He's had fewer than 5 fantasy points in back-to-back games. Hasn't been a top 15 wide receiver in his last 5. And Washington has fewer than 200. They've not thrown a lot of passing yards over the last couple of weeks. Sorry about that. The thing that just threw me off right here is I was given a note earlier this week by Okada, who was like, Seahawks defense has been pretty good lately, but it's come against some of the league's worst, like the Jets and teams like that. And I'm like, I think Washington falls into that category. Unless Dwayne Haskins suddenly became Patrick Mahomes and I missed it, I think yes, Seattle's been playing well against bad quarterbacks. He's a bad quarterback. NFL-wise, he's great. If we were playing pickup or something, I would want Dwayne Haskins. NFL-wise, probably not so much. Anyways, those are the fantasy villains. Listen, some of us have made bad decisions over the past couple of weeks. We started Keenan Allen. Guilty. Maybe you started Austin Eckler. Thanks, Tony Lynn. But this does not mean that your week is over. We have some players who can help you get right in Week 15. It only takes 1 or 2 guys to get you back. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Russell Wilson warming up. I had to bench him in a league that places a high priority on passing yardage. That is a thing. I think if you're playing in a standard league, it's fine. Start Russell Wilson. But I think that he's going to be in the low 200s, couple of touchdown passes. I need a home run today. I don't need a single. But anyways, welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. I'm Adam Rank. That's Kimmy Checks. That is Marcus Grant. And right now we're going to play Face Off. Face Off. By the way, the bald guy in Face Off, he steals the show. He's the best. We're going to start. We're going to go rapid fire. We're going to start at the quarterback position. Here we go. Better start this week. Kimmy, Kyler Murray or Jared Goff?
Like Jared Goff, but I'm going to swing with Kyler Murray on this one. Philly's allowing the most rushing yards per game to QBs. Kyler can rush the ball, so Kyler.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the Rams could run the ball an awful lot. Better start, Ryan Tannehill or Tom Brady versus the Falcons. Marcus.
I'm going to go with Ryan Tannehill here. I just think that the Titans are going to put up a whole bunch of points. And I know people are worried about Derrick Henry stealing the show, but I still think Tanny can ball.
Wrong! Tom Brady's had multiple touchdown passes in 4 consecutive games. Well, what does he have to do? Better start, Kirk Cousins versus the Bears or Phillip Rivers versus the Texans. Kimmy.
P-Ribs, Phillip Rivers versus the Texans. The matchups there. He's had 17-plus fantasy points in 4 straight games. I don't want to root against your Chicago Bears. Be happy about that.
Yeah, but Cousins, 6 consecutive home games with at least 3 touchdowns. Should I put him in over Brady?
Stop. I'm done with you.
Okay,
Get out.
Okay. Ben Roethlisberger versus the Bengals. Baker Mayfield versus the Giants. Marcus, where are you going?
I'm going to go with Big Ben in this one because the Bengals defense has been bad. The Giants have been actually okay. So I think Ben is going to be all right this week.
Yeah, Ben Roethlisberger, 4 touchdown passes against the Bengals in Week 10. Let's move to the running back position. J.K. Dobbins versus the Jags. Mark Ingram is a healthy scratch. Or Kareem Hunt. Where are you going, Kimmy?
Kareem Hunt all the way. He's just coming off of 2 total touchdowns in Week 14 and 110 rushing yards. So Kareem Hunt, we understand that he's a number 1 running back. So yes, Kareem Hunt.
Hard to argue, but I will. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. I like J.K. Dobbins. That's good problems to have. All right, Kenyon Drake versus the Eagles. Raheem Mostert versus the Cowboys. Marcus.
I'm going to go with Raheem Mostert, even though he's splitting touches with Jeff Wilson in this one. I don't know. I've just been underwhelmed by Kenyon Drake, even after his hot streak in the middle of the season. Plus, picking on that Cowboys defense.
Eagles, 10th most fantasy points against the running backs over the last month, but I think I tend to agree with that one. Tony Pollard or CEH Kimmy?
This is tough because I don't love either of these guys this week, but I'm probably going to swing with CEH on this one over Tony Pollard. Maybe if it was Zeke, I would say Zeke instead of CEH, but just Tony Pollard being the backup, I think I'm going to rock with Clyde Edwards-Helaire today.
Wayne Gallman versus the Browns. DeAndre Swift versus the Titans. Marcus.
I like Gallman this week, but I'm going to go with Swift here. I just think he has more upside because the Titan run defense has been pretty awful.
And a reminder, Matthew Stafford is active today. Active. That guy never misses games. He's good. Anyways, let's move on to the wide receiver position. Better start, Kimmy. T.Y. Hilton or Amari Cooper?
Ooh, T.Y. Hilton, 4 receiving touchdowns in the last 3 games combined. Plus, he's just notoriously really good against the Texans. He's had 11 career touchdowns versus them and averages over 19 fantasy points. So T.Y. Hilton this week.
All right, Tyler Lockett versus the Washington FT. Jarvis Landry versus the Giants. Marcus.
I don't love it, but I'm going to say Tyler Lockett here. I just think he has a higher potential ceiling. It's a tough call either way, but I'm going to go with Lockett.
All right, Brandon Cooks versus the Colts. Chris Godwin versus the Falcons. Kimmy.
Chris Godwin, please do not burn me. Bro, the matchup is there against the Falcons, allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. He's also the leader for the Buccaneers in targets, receptions, and receiving yards, so we need a bounce-back week. Make it this one, Chris Godwin.
All right, you convinced me. All right, very much. I was on the fence, but I agree. All right, you swung me over that way. All right, Deontay Johnson or Juju on Monday night. Marcus.
I know everybody's made a big deal about Deontay Johnson having skillets for hands lately, but I still think he has a higher ceiling and more upside than Juju, so I'm going to go with Deontay.
But that's like you're supposed to catch the football. Like if you're a cook and you don't know how to cook, that seems like you work a spatula or something. I don't know. Anyways, time now though for fantasy insurance presented by Geico. We're going to be talking about some of our favorite sleepers for the week. Kim, why don't you kick us off?
All right, so we understand the news that Michael Thomas is not going to be playing, so who's a sleeper who's going to get all the targets in his absence? Emmanuel Sanders. Now, I understand that both Emmanuel Sanders and Traquan Smith are probably going to split the target share, but I love Sanders this week against the Saints. Now, in games without Michael Thomas this season, Emmanuel Sanders is averaging nearly 8 targets and 14.5 fantasy points a game. However, the matchup, it's going to be a little bit tough against the Chiefs, who are number 2 against wideouts. But I do think that the production, especially with Drew Brees being back at the starting quarterback, is going to bode well for Manny Sanders.
I'm looking at Rashard Higgins, maybe the true Hollywood in the NFL, compared to that other guy down in Baltimore who's using the nickname. Over the last few weeks, he has been on par with Jarvis Landry in terms of snaps played, routes run, just a shade behind Landry in terms of targets. And with James Bradbury not being available, this might open some things up for that passing game there for the Browns. Also, if you can get him and if you can survive, that means next week Higgins and the Browns have a matchup against the Jets. So it could be two weeks in a row you can get him in your lineup.
I'm going to go with Lynn Bowden, and this is a deep sleeper, but with all the injuries to the Miami Dolphins, I do believe they're going to look for him once again. He led the team in targets last week. And the cool thing, too, the little cheat code, he qualifies as a running back on NFL.com. We use a master list provided by the Miami Dolphins. If you go onto their website, it's going to say something different. The list that they provide to us has him listed as a running back. So don't get mad at us. Don't get mad at Joe Robbie or whomever. Whoever's in charge over there, Dan Marino. Get mad at him. Don't get mad at me. He's a pretty good option this week against the New England Patriots. That was Fantasy Insurance presented by Geico. And listen, it might be the Del Taco Cholula breakfast roller I just ate, but something is heating up in here. Or it could be our Week 15 spicy, burning questions. Like, for instance, is Jalen Hurts a must start? Well, you're going to find out next. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Time now for the burning questions. I am Adam Rank alongside Kimmy Chex, Marcus Grant. Let's talk about Russell Wilson. How concerned should we be going into this matchup against the FT? Marcus?
We should be concerned, but at the same time, I just don't think you're going to find somebody with a higher potential ceiling than Russ. And that's sort of what we're looking at. Especially, look, if you come into today and maybe you're down a few points because your opponents had, say Darren Waller or Aaron Jones or something, you do have to kind of shoot for that ceiling. And you're not going to find another quarterback either on your bench or on the waiver wire who has a ceiling as high as Wilson. That being said, I still only think he's going to get you like 17, 18 points. It's not necessarily going to be a huge let Russ cook sort of day.
Right, I agree. I have him pegged for probably around 16 fantasy points. Now, I understand that last week it was the Jets, but he finally was back in Russ-like form, right? He threw 4 total passing touchdowns, spreading the ball to 4 different targets. That was tying his total record for touchdowns over the last 4 games where we kind of saw that decline. We understand that Chase Young in the matchup against the Washington FT is a little bit closer, but like you said, he has that huge potential for a massive ceiling game, so you do have to start Russell Wilson this week.
Well, one of the things that I would point out is obviously this Washington FT defense is really good, and they've been haranguing a lot of prominent quarterbacks. And you know what your scoring is like in your fantasy league. Now, if you play with the standard, lame old like 4 points for a passing touchdown and there's no bonuses for yardage, then like Russell Wilson's going to be fine because quarterbacks don't tend to kill you unless they're a total disaster. But if you need a dynamic quarterback who's going to throw for a ton of yards, more than 2 touchdowns, then you might want to look at somebody else. Kirk Cousins, Tom Brady, any of those guys who you might have on your bench. You've been waiting. What do I do? Those would be the guys. Don't go pick up Chase Daniel because he's not starting this week because Matt Stafford's back. But anyways, there's a reason to be concerned. What about, though, Kyler Murray? Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts. Kimmy, which one of these quarterbacks would you want to go with?
Okay, how has Jalen Hurts started one NFL game and now everyone's like, oh, should I start him over Kyler Murray? We don't actually know if he's going to be as good as he was last week. We understand that he had over 100 rushing yards. The upside is there. He's great. But do you know who's actually a great fantasy quarterback and has been this entire season? It is Kyler Murray. Now, the matchup against the Eagles is there for him. We understand that he's not been rushing the ball as much because he's been dealing with that shoulder injury. However, if there was any time for Kyler Murray to rush the ball, it's against the Eagles, who are allowing the most rushing yards per games to quarterbacks this season. I'm starting Kyler over Jalen Hurts, and I'm so surprised that this continues to be a conversation and a question.
I think what it is obviously everybody loves the shiny new thing, right? I say that all the time. And Jalen Hurts is the shiniest, newest thing that we have in fantasy football. But he's got a great rushing floor, but he's certainly not the developed passer that we've seen from Kyler Murray. And I think that's what gives Kyler the edge for me, is that both guys can run the ball effectively when they need to, when they want to. But when it comes down to it, Kyler can also get the ball out to his targets, I think, a little bit more effectively. And that is why I would start him over Hurts.
Yeah, but the thing is when Taysom Hill came in and immediately had a great game, everybody was apprehensive, and then he had a great game the second time. And I think that the same thing can happen here with Jalen Hurts because it goes back to that running, and Kyler Murray is a little apprehensive. It's like 2 guys going to Las Vegas. Kyler's going to be there for 5 days, so he's taking it easy. Jalen is there for 1 night. That might be his last night. So he's going crazy. He's ordering Jaeger bombs at the bar. He's there to have a good time. So that means he's going to be running the ball an awful lot. And thank you. And does this Arizona coaching staff strike you as the kind of coaching staff that's like, I've got 1 week of tape on him. We're shutting him down. If this was Bill Belichick? Sure. The Cardinals? Yeah, I don't think so. I love Jalen Hurts today, and I guess I'm a lunatic. I'm crazy, and I take crazy risks, and that's what I do. All right, up next, it's our must-starts of the week for every position. Plus, we're hitting up Twitter to answer all of your pressing fantasy questions. Pop the champagne, because we're heading to the fantasy championships, baby! You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. There is Matthew Stafford, one of the toughest dudes in the league. Like, I know we were talking about his injury. Oh, listen, I talked more about Chase Daniel this past week than I did about Christian McCaffrey, and I knew both had about the same chance of playing. Because Stafford was going to play in this ball game, because that's what he does. He's a tough guy, and so we like to see him out there. Good luck this week. I want the Lions to lose. What am I saying? Anyways, here are the notable actives and inactives. And it's time now for 15 minutes to kick off, presented by Geico. Alex Smith will not be playing, but of course you see Matthew Stafford right there. Will be playing through multiple injuries. Ezekiel Elliott not playing because of a calf injury. Antonio Gibson, Damian Harris, Ronald Jones, Myles Gaskin, all inactive. But David Johnson came off the COVID-19 list, is available for you today. Wide receiver-wise, Marquise Hollywood Brown, Brandon Cooks are active. Some big names who are inactive: Kenny Golladay, Julio Jones, Devontae Parker, Debo, and Mike Gesicki will not be playing. Michael Thomas was placed on injured reserve. He is out for the rest of the season because of that ankle injury. That was 15 minutes to kick off, presented by Geico. Welcome back to the show, Adam Rank. Oh, we got 4 bucks. Kimmy checks, Marcus Grant, and of course, joining us right now is Michael F. Florio, who's been doing a great job of answering questions. How you doing, Mike? Are you well?
I'm as well as I've been in 25 years, Rank. My favorite team, the Buffalo Bills, won their first division that I can ever remember. So it was a fun day yesterday.
Yeah, as a Lakers fan, I know what it's like to go through long stretches without, stuff like that. But obviously, you're answering a lot of questions out there. Before you tell us who the most asked about player was, Kimmy, Marcus, why don't you give us a guess of who everybody is freaking out about?
I'm sure everybody hit the panic button because of the Ezekiel Elliott news. So I'm assuming it was probably Tony Pollard.
This feels like a layup this week. I'm going Tony Pollard.
There were a good amount of Tony Pollard questions, but he was not the most asked about player. It was actually J.K. Dobbins. A lot of people asking if they can use him now with Mark Ingram being inactive today. And some running backs I said I would use over Dobbins were Cam Akers, DeAndre Swift, David Montgomery, even like James Robinson, Chris Carson. And then running backs I said I would use Dobbins over Raheem Mostert, Kenyon Drake, James Conner, Leonard Fournette, so Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So that's kind of where I have J.K. Dobbins. But there's been a lot of questions, a lot of people freaking out. Some people even asked me if they should sit Travis Kelce this week. So people are definitely overthinking a little bit.
I know that the Saints have allowed the fewest fantasy points to tight ends, but now you're being ridiculous. Please stop. Who are you going to start? Go start Dalton Schultz over him then. That's fine. Let's take some fan questions, though. Let's roll through those. Roethlisberger, Stafford, or Minshew. Kimmy, which one of these quarterbacks would you want to start?
Ooh, I'm rocking with Big Ben on this one. We understand that he's been good all season long. He has all of those receiving options to eat off of, so Big Ben.
All right, next question is James White or Chase Edmonds, Marcus?
Why'd you have to give this one to me?
Because it's funny.
I would probably go with James White. I feel like both of them are probably going to get you. You'll be lucky to get double-digit points with either of them, but let's go James White. Why not?
All right, well, 2 more. Logan Thomas or Evan Ingram, Michael F. Florio?
I'm going to go with Ingram there. The Browns have allowed a lot of fantasy points to tight ends, and with Dwayne Haskins starting and not Alex Smith, that gives me a little bit of concern for Logan Thomas this week.
Understood. And Antonio Brown or Chase Claypool, half PPR. I like Antonio Brown today. I think that there's an opportunity for the Buccaneers to throw the football. With no Rojo, they're going to be throwing the football an awful lot. I feel great now about starting Tom Brady. Thanks. Keep those questions coming to us at NFL Fantasy. And next week, Oh, my God! It's time now for Sunday Fun Day! Woo-hoo! Who are the players that are going to pop off this week? Marcus, why don't you get us started?
Let's start with Jonathan Taylor. Why don't we, going against the Houston Texans? And you talked earlier in the show about all the folks who held on to these rookie running backs, waiting for it to happen. And finally, it took 2.5 months, but it finally happened. And we talked about the Ravens backfield kind of being pared down to two guys. The same thing has happened in the Colts backfield. Jordan Wilkins seems to be out of the mix, so it is pretty much a Taylor and Hines backfield. And against this Texans team, I do expect Jonathan Taylor to have a really big day.
Yeah, it's going to be a rookie themed in week 15 because I'm going with another rookie here, Brandon Ayuk of your 49ers, Marcus. And last week, Deebo Samuel left early and Ayuk had a season high in targets, catches, and yards. The only thing he didn't find was the end zone. Luckily, he gets the Cowboys this week, who give up a ton of fantasy points and even more touchdowns to wide receivers this week. I think Brandon Ayuk is going to lead a lot of people to week 15 victories.
How are you guys not saying Mr. December? Please enter Derrick Henry into this conversation. Do you remember when he would score so many points in December? He is so good in the fantasy playoffs. 36 plus fantasy points in 2 of the last 3 games. The matchup is there today against the Lions, who are allowing the 5th most rushing yards per game to running backs this season. The guy's a monster. He's a beast. I don't even need to say anymore. Just enter Derrick Henry's name.
I know, but we're going for a rookie theme, Kim. That's my, anyways. But I think you're absolutely right with Derrick Henry. And I will go back to the rookies and say Justin Jefferson going up against the Chicago Bears. The last time he faced this team, he had 8 for 135. Going up against Jalen Johnson, who's now battling a shoulder injury. I know it's not as easy as saying Kirk Cousins at home, but he's played really well at home. What do you want me to do? Lie about it? That's where he plays his best football. Kimmy, should I start him over Tom Brady?
Stop! I'm logging off of the show.
Thank you. Okay. Well, let's go to the quarterbacks that we do trust. Hey, Florio, that was Sunday Funny, whatever. Who's a quarterback you trust, Florio?
If you have to go a little bit deeper, I trust Phillip Rivers this week. In the last month, he has been a QB1, averaging over 19 fantasy points per game with at least 17 and multiple passing touchdowns in each game in that span. And one of those games were against this Houston Texans team where he scored 19 fantasy points. It is just one of those good moments, I think, for Phillip Rivers where he is playing well and he's coming into a really strong matchup. I have him as a top 12 quarterback this week.
Ooh, you know who's also been playing well? He's getting back to his MVP-like form. It's Lamar Jackson going up against Jacksonville today. Jacksonville allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to QBs this season. A good thing for Lamar Jackson, the guy who can consistently rush and throw his way into the end zone. 25-plus fantasy points in 2 straight contests. Like I said, he's getting back to vintage form. The matchup is there. He's going to ball out today against Duval.
I'm going to keep a theme going with Deshaun Watson, who it just seems like he keeps losing pieces on that offense. And generally speaking, he still prospers. And the matchup against the Colts, we look at it and I think we immediately sort of recoil against it. But you look over the last 4 weeks, they're giving up quite a few fantasy points. In fact, 7th most points per game to the quarterback position. If we talk about guys with a rushing floor, Deshaun Watson has that. So I still think, especially now with Brandon Cooks expected to be back, that's going to help open some things up for the passing game.
I'm going to go with Tom Brady. 4 weeks ago, my friend Beverage Dave dropped him in our league. I picked him up with the express intent to play him this week because I have Russell Wilson and knew that it was going to be a tough matchup. We put a premium on passing yardage, so you need a quarterback who's going to go out and just throw the ball all over the field. Brady, multiple touchdown passes in 4 consecutive games. He's averaging over 2 touchdown passes per game. The Falcons are allowing a lot of fantasy points. And last week, Justin Herbert attempted 44 passes. Not a lot of them were downfield. Tom Brady is going to do that today. I'm starting him over Kirk Cousins. I won't ask.
Break. I was just going to ask, are you going to start him over Kirk Cousins? What's the final answer?
Definitely. Here's my phone. Okay. I threw my phone onto the bed. I can't even touch it. So I can't make a move. I'm sitting here without a tether. But the one question I will ask you though is what about the running back position? Who's a must start running back for you, Kim?
Why don't we rock with Chris Carson this week going up against a Washington FT? We know Washington's really tough against quarterbacks and really tough against wideouts, and I guess the only hole is that they're not so tough against the run. Chris Carson, 9 total touchdowns in 9 games played this season, over 18 fantasy points the last 2 weeks. I feel comfortable getting him into my lineup this Sunday.
You know what? I'm going to go with James Robinson here. And I know that during the break, just a peek behind the curtain, Florio asked us a question about a bunch of his running backs he should start. And I said of the group he had, he should probably sit Robinson. But that doesn't mean the rest of you should. This is a guy who's still getting a huge workload. And even though the matchup isn't particularly great, you're sort of chasing the volume and some of the pass production and believing that James Robinson can still be consistent.
Yeah, I did take James Robinson out of my lineup there, but I do agree with you for the most part, Marcus. And Marcus, you were talking up J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards earlier as a two-headed backfield, and that's exactly what it'll be again this week with no Mark Ingram. And it is in a great matchup against the Jaguars. They're in the top 4 on fantasy points allowed to running backs. I expect a ton of running today for the Ravens, for Dobbins, Lamar, Gus Edwards, and all of them.
Yeah, I love J.K. Dobbins this week. I think that's a great pick. I'm also one of your choices, Florio, was David Montgomery, but he's averaged over 25 fantasy points since week 11. That's the most amongst running backs, and he's had at least 24 fantasy points in 3 consecutive games. He's getting the total yardage, 4 touchdowns in his last 3 games combined. The Vikings, of course, are a great matchup. 9th most rushing yards per game to running backs allowed this season, and I got to go get my phone. I got to go get Kirk Cousins into my lineup. No, I can't. Okay, I won't. Okay, wide receiver wise, Marcus, who is a player that you must start at that position?
It's going to be Bobby Trees for me, Robert Woods. And this is us sort of picking on that matchup against the Jets. I said at the start of the show that Jared Goff had a fantastic matchup, and that applies to his wide receivers as well. Look, I think Cooper Kupp can go out and have a great game. I tend to side with Woods because I think they find more and creative ways to get him the football. You see it as a runner a lot as well as a receiver. So, but I do think that regardless, you got to have a Rams wide receiver in your lineup, and Robert Woods is number 1 for me.
I really like the Robert Woods call. I'm going to go with T.Y. Hilton here. You heard me talking up his quarterback, Phillip Rivers, a little bit earlier. But T.Y. Hilton has owned the Houston Texans in his career in 17 career games. That is more than a full NFL season. He's averaging over 19 fantasy points against them, and he's went off for 25 earlier this year. He is a top 20 wide receiver and a must-play for me this week.
Another must-play for me, who is a guy who's actually sat on my bench and then he always balls out. It's Marv Jones going up against the Titans. 5 receiving touchdowns since week 7. The Titans are allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to wideouts this season. He's had over 13 points in 6 of the last 8 games. We're happy that Matt Stafford's going to be able to play, so I'm going to fire up Marv Jones.
Yeah, I love Marvin Jones, and I was not worried about him, whomever the quarterback was. Matthew Stafford makes that a better play for me, so I agree with you, Kim. I also like DK Metcalf this week against the Washington FT, even though I have an apprehension with Russell Wilson because of the quarterback scoring in a league that I play with. I still expect Russell Wilson to throw 2 touchdowns, expect one of those to go to DK Metcalf, who has just proven to be one of the best wide receivers in the game, something that you got to trust week in and week out. Now let's move to the tight end position. I need you to pick a player that you guarantee will score at least 13 fantasy points, but it can't be Travis Kelce. So Florio, who do you got?
I'm going with Mark Andrews here. Kimmy was saying it earlier, and I agree 100%. Lamar looks like his MVP self once again, and this is a matchup against the Jaguars that even if he wasn't playing like an MVP, it would be a perfect get-right game for him. And with his receivers not really practicing this week, I think it could just lead to a little bit more volume for Mark Andrews in this really friendly matchup.
The most friendliest matchup of them all is against the Falcons. That's why I'm going to start Rob Gronkowski. We understand him and Tom Brady have that connection. 5 receiving touchdowns since week 6, 3rd most amongst all tight ends. I think Gronk is an easy, safe option for a tight end start today against ATL.
You've been battling rank all day about this Kirk Cousins, versus Tom Brady thing. I'll tell you, though, that Kirk Cousins' tight end, Irv Smith's in a really good spot against the Bears, who've given up the 4th most points per game to the tight end position. So we may have a new hashtag by the end of the day, maybe hashtag let Irv swerve if things go the way we hope they do in this one.
Kim, I'm mad that you laughed at that. Come on. I wanted a deadpan.
It was good. Stop it.
I'm going to go with Jared Cook in a similar situation, kind of like Mark Andrews, where the receiver position not playing well around him or being diminished because of injuries or something like that opens up an opportunity for Cook here. And now the Chiefs have allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to tight ends over the last 4 games. And I think that any time that Drew Brees gets near the end zone, he's going to be looking for Jared Cook to put them over the top there. This is going to be a player who's going to be heavily targeted for an opportunity like that. Oh, look, everybody's grabbing the trophies. By the way, this is what we're playing for. And, one last push. Go to NFL.com/fantasy trophy. You can pick one of these up. Listen, have everybody in your league chip in a couple of bucks. It's something cool to have. It's cool to have something tangible. And you know what? And I do want to thank everybody for joining the show. Thanks to Kimmy, Marcus, and Michael F. Florio for helping everybody here as well. I think we're going to do it. This was NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Good luck this week. See you in the finals.